Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriel Tande, and I'm an analyst with the retail and food manufacturing team here at S&P Global Commodity Insights. And today I'm joined by David Silbiger, our proteins analyst here at S&P Global Commodity Insights. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi, Gabriel, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm doing well.
Great. So, David, let's use our time here to talk about some recent major developments in the poultry and beef market. Yeah. Why don't we start about the U.S. tariff hike and how they are affecting Brazil's export into the U.S. and in the global markets?
Yeah, that's definitely relevant. After initial shock, or everyone in the Brazilian beef industry was very surprised and worried about the impacts that tariffs would have on their business, we can tell that the negative effects were fairly limited, even though, of course, exports for to the US, which so far were performing exceedingly well, are now grinding almost to a halt. Total export figures, according to the recent released data, are still very high, driven especially by robust demand in Asia. However, some problems linger. For example, Brazil used to export a lot of hindquarter cuts to the US, which do not have a very well developed market both in Brazil and abroad, and will struggle to adapt. It's important to understand that Brazil, for example, has expanded its exports to Mexico, which in turn has also expanded its own exports to the US, hinting at some sort of triangular trade.
Okay, interesting. So, could you say that the tariffs like backfired as they did not hurt the Brazilian industry as much as expected, but like in the US, prices are still going up?
I think we could say that, for example, the US market is struggling with historical lows in cattle availability. And at the same time, they have been blocking imports from other possible suppliers. So even though Brazil, some producers, especially the ones that were very focused on exporting hindquarters to the US, are bearing huge costs to the average US consumer, the price penalty is also steep. On the flip side, the Brazilian government has also announced a plan to bail out, to rescue some of the producers and meat packers that were mostly affected by sanctions. So again, the impacts are going to be fairly limited.
Okay, now interesting. And before we end our talk here, let's move on to China because I know the Chinese market is a point of concern for Brazilian products, Brazilian exporters. Could you say that uh, is that true? Could you walk us through that?
Indeed, Brazil also faces some commercial problems on the other side of the Pacific. Even though China and Brazil have been having a really strong commercial relationship over the last 20 years, this relationship has also been marred by several strains, namely accusations of both sides accusing the other of non-competitive practice like dumping, which are pricing out their local industries. In the case of proteins, the Chinese authorities are worried that oversupply of imports are hurting their domestic industry capabilities, which do not have the same productivity, do not have the same yields as the Brazilian beef industry or the Uruguayan or Argentinian beef industry. And as such, they are worried that having such a hike in imports is hurting the domestic business profitability, and as such, they have recently launched a so-called safeguard investigation, which is a mechanism established by the World Trade Organization, in which a country can assess if indeed these imports are doing too much damage to their domestic industry. If they find that there were some dumping practice or other malpractice, they are legally allowed to issue quotas or tariffs, which would definitely hurt the Brazilian beef industry, as China is by far the main buyer of Brazilian beef, accounting for roughly 40 to 50% of all exports. And there is a whole industry, so-called Boichina industry, which is 100% devoted to producing a specific type of beef only to fulfill the Chinese market demand. So if the investigation that's supposed to end in November finds out that Brazil has done malpractice, uncompetitive practice, and it decides to issue some sort of tariffs or some sort of quota, it could really hurt the domestic market.
Okay, now interesting. And do you th so we can say that the Brazilian industry will face significant challenges in the near future, but I know that our forecast is a bit more optimistic. Is that right?
Yeah, even though there are several risks in two of the major players for the Brazil, the US and China, the outlook in other countries is still positive. As I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, Brazil has been expanding its global footprint in global beef market, also in poultry and pork. So the losses are limited, and beyond that, producers are also more more producing is becoming more profitable due to the decrease in feed costs, as Brazil recently had a significantly large uh, grains harvest. So there's also that their margins are improved due to more controlled costs. Speaking about poultry briefly, it's important to highlight that even though China still blocks Brazilian imports after the HPA outbreak in May, recently a Chinese delegation came to Brazil and they assessed Brazil's sanitary capabilities, its labs, its whole production system, and it seems that they are poised to reopen soon.
Okay, no, very interesting. So thank you very much, David, for your time and walking us through the beef and the poultry markets. And thank you everyone for joining and bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.